So there are three types of people that typically like AR-15s. And I think it's very important to know who these three types of people are, because if you ever ask anyone for advice on what types of parts that you should get or what you should look for in an AR-15, it's important to know who that type of person is that's giving you advice, because all three types have different types of goals and things that they value in their AR-15s. The first type, the elitist. The elitists typically believe that everything on their rifle needs to be from the most expensive company. And if everything on their rifle didn't come from said company, then they tend to believe that that gun is probably crap. So how do you spot an elitist? These guys tend to care more about looking cool than actually being effective, and you can typically spot them at a local brewery drinking IPAs up in the Pacific Northwest. They're usually on Instagram and take phenomenal photos. They usually try to do the color coordination between their rifle and their carry gun, and they coordinate it with the color of their clothing, and some of them even try to color coordinate it with the color of their car as well. Typically, these guys are going to conceal carry something like a Zev Technologies gun or something from Agency Arms that cost around $2,500 to $3,000. That's usually going to be their EDC gun. You can typically find these guys driving around in their Ford Raptor Pavement Princess with a 50 cal antenna, and or their BMW M series cutting you off in traffic and not using their blinker. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the second type of guy, which is the cheapskate. The cheapskate tends to believe that all the cheapest parts are just as good as the most expensive parts. And in some cases, they might be right about that, but then in some cases, they are drastically wrong about that. You can usually spot these guys by their "Come and Take It" bumper sticker that's slapped on the back of their 1997 pickup truck, which is usually parked at the local dive bar, and they really like to drink Keystone Light.
My name is Keith Stone.
These guys also like to claim that any modification to a Glock is pointless, but for some reason they like to color fill the lettering on the slide and buy a grip plug, which serves zero purpose at all. These are also the types of guys that will try to stipple their gun themselves, and it usually looks like boogers, because why pay someone to do it correctly the first time? You could spot these stipple jobs from a mile away because they usually look like crap. Now, there's nothing wrong with being an elitist or being a cheapskate. Both of these groups make very valid statements in regards to the things that they value in their AR-15s. They just tend to take them too far to the extreme to where they almost think of it as a religion. And this brings me to the third type of person. If you have the elitist over here and the cheapskate over here, everyone else is somewhere on a scale in the middle. But I usually group everyone else in the middle into two types of categories. There's the DIY guy, and there's the I don't have time for DIY guy. Both of these guys essentially want the same thing. They tend to value their time and their money. So they really value things that are affordable, but they don't want to go so cheap that the reliability and the safety of their rifle is compromised. However, they don't mind splurging here and there on a couple of extra pieces, given that those pieces also serve a very important purpose for their rifle. They tend to not care about what other people think about them or their guns, and nor do they care about getting clout on Instagram. Neither one of these guys will have bumper stickers on their cars or a 50 cal antenna, because they know you're just inviting criminals to smash your windows. Now, the DIY guy really enjoys building his AR-15s from scratch because he enjoys the process of searching on the internet, trying to source the best parts for the best price, because he doesn't want to waste any money on wasted parts as you would if you bought a rifle and then modified it after the fact. The I don't have time guy would love to build an AR-15 from scratch, but between working 60+ hours a week and raising a family, he simply doesn't have time to sit down, do the research, search for the right prices for the right products, nor does he have the time to actually sit down and put everything together and take it out to the range and to make sure that everything is running correctly. Then he can finally zero it. He doesn't have time for all that. So he wants something that's just going to be the best bang for his budget, something that he can slap an optic on, get it zeroed, and go to town. Which brings me to the AR-15 that we are talking about today. And the gun we're talking about today is for that last type of guy. He would love to do DIY, but he just doesn't have the time to sit down and build one or research the parts to put one together. This is gonna be the gun for you. And just a heads up, guys, as we go throughout this video, we're gonna be talking about multiple different things, and we're gonna be talking about some cool gear that you might wanna pick up for yourself. If that's the case, follow the first link in the video description or the link that's pinned in the comments below, and that'll take you over to my blog post where I'll have a parts list for everything that we're gonna talk about today. just in case you're interested. So for the Lead Star Arms Grunt to make sense to you guys, we need to refer back to a video I published back in January, and it was a video about how to make your cheap AR-15 feel expensive. And in that video, I just went through a few different key parts of your AR-15 that you can upgrade relatively affordably, and it will make a cheap rifle feel more expensive. Not just look more expensive, but the way that it feels and shoots. Now, in the comments of that video, I did see a bunch of people saying, why not just buy a more expensive AR-15 to begin with? Why would you just modify something that's cheap? And my answer to that was, not everyone has the means to buy the more expensive AR-15. However, they can buy something that's budget friendly and then upgrade it slowly over time. Also, it's good to do it that way if you're new to AR-15s and you don't know exactly what you're looking for. You don't know if you want a cold hammer forged barrel or a stainless steel barrel or a chrome olivandrium barrel. There's a learning curve to knowing what parts are gonna suit you and your goals for the rifle. So that's who that video was really tailored for. What makes this gun a little bit more special, it's an affordable gun. We'll get into the price here in a little bit, but it has the majority of those upgrades that I talked about in that last video already on it from the factory. Now, something I want to make very clear in today's video, this is not a high-end AR-15. This is going to be a mid-tier AR-15. But what's interesting about this one is it has a lot of upgrades and features that are typically only on higher-end AR-15s. It's not going to have all of them, but it's going to have quite a few. So keep those things in mind. I'm not saying this is a cheap AR-15. I'm not saying this is an elitist AR-15. This one's going to fall in the middle like those people that we talked about earlier. The goal of the Lead Star Arms Grunt is to have an affordable AR-15 that can handle a little bit of abuse, but has a few key upgrades on it that are typically only seen on higher end AR-15s. Now, the cool thing about these is they do come in a few different sizes. They got a 10-inch pistol, then this one is a 16-inch rifle. They also have them in a ton of different colors. I got this one in an OD green, and I think that the OD green looks dead sexy. I've never had an OD green rifle, and I'm actually digging it quite a bit. Now, they even come in different calibers as well. I believe they got 223 Wild, 5.56 NATO, 300 Blackout, and 7.62 by 39. I'm actually very interested in testing the 7.62 by 39 in the near future, so maybe that video will be coming soon. I don't have one yet, but maybe I can get one and we can see how it performs. And although this gun has many of those upgrades or enhancements from the factory, a lot of them may not be apparent to the untrained eye. It's not until you start really looking at this thing and its details, really start noticing how much care and how much thought actually went into this AR-15 to keep it in an affordable range, but at the same time, making it feel a lot nicer. First, let's talk about the handguard. Now, the handguard comes in a bunch of different lengths. The one that we have is actually a 17-inch handguard, and you can see how it extends out underneath this muzzle brake here. It's an M-lock, and you'll also notice that the top of this is scalloped out, so there's no Picatinny here. There's only a little bit on the end where you can see the iron sight and a little bit back up here just in case you have to bridge this gap with your optic mount. Now, this can be a pro or a con, and it really depends on what your goals are for your rifle. For example, if you're planning on running night vision and getting an IR laser for this gun, this is not the handguard for you. Now, typically when you're gonna mount an IR laser, you don't wanna use just Picatinny rail sections. Because it's a laser, you're gonna have to zero it. And sometimes those rail sections can move around. So usually if you wanna do something like an IR laser, you can put it right here on the top of the gun, and then it's gonna stay there every single time. Now, I guess technically you could put an IR laser on the front up here where this front sight post is, but you would sacrifice having a flip up sight. Like I said, it could be a pro or a con. Now, the pro to having a rail that doesn't have Picatinny through this midsection is, number one, it's lighter weight. And number two, when you're reaching out to shoot it, you can really get a good grip on it, especially like right here, and you can really pull this thing into your shoulder, and you're not gonna get the cheese grater effect happening to your thumb. So those are the pros and the cons of the handguard. However, this handguard does have two features that are typically only seen on some things that are a little bit higher end. Number one is the way that it clamps around the barrel nut. Now, for AR-15s, that's probably gonna be the most important feature of a handguard, is how well it can clamp down around the barrel nut. On more affordable AR-15s or AR-15s that would be, classified as cheaper, typically they'll have some bolts that go through here. And if they're cheap, all they'll do is they'll thread one side and they'll make the threading in the handguard itself. Also, with the cheaper handguards, the actual set screws or the nuts that they use to clamp down with are usually going to be made of a smaller type of Allen wrench or something like that, and they're easy to strip. However, when it comes to something that's a little bit more durable, they typically are going to have some kind of nut on one side of the handguard, and they're going to make the Allen wrenches a little bit more beefy so you can really torque down the handguard. Because the last thing you want happening is, especially if you're going to use this for like self-defense or duty use especially, you don't want your handguard wobbling around because it can mess up the zero of, especially of your front sight, but also like a D-ball, or also if you have to bridge this gap with your scope, depending on the mount that you have. That's actually something that a lot of higher end companies really take a lot of pride in, is how well that this thing will clamp onto the barrel nut. I'm not saying that this is the best, I'm just saying it's better than something that's more affordable. Now, the second thing that you usually only see on, higher end or better quality AR-15 handguards is an anti-rotation method to the handguard. So for example, with this one, if you look at the sides where the upper meets the handguard, you'll notice these two little pieces that kind of slide into place on the sides of the upper receiver. What that does is that even if this is a little bit loose, it's going to prevent this handguard from spinning laterally before it can pull off a certain amount. It's not much, but it's those little things that really matter when it comes to something that's a little bit higher quality versus a little bit lower quality. Something else I noticed about this one has the 17-inch handguard. I'm not gonna say that you need a 17-inch or a 12-inch, it really depends on you. Typically, the longer your rail, it's gonna be a little bit more front heavy. It can mess with the balance of the gun. But this one has a 17-inch, and it sticks out just underneath the muzzle brake right here, which we'll cover this too in a second. Now, I don't know if this has any practical benefit, but it does look dead sexy. So it's getting style points for that. Now, this isn't something that's always seen on higher end handguards, but it does have a QD point right here, as well as on the side that's facing me. And then they also put a QD point right here, as well as the side that's facing me. So you have 4 QD points. Typically on a lower end handguard, you're only gonna have 2, if any. Since we're out here on the barrel end of the gun, let's talk about this muzzle brake. So it does come with its own muzzle brake, and what's cool about this muzzle brake is not only does it do a phenomenal job at keeping the gun flat so that you can shoot faster, it also does a decent job at mitigating the flash. I noticed when I was shooting this towards dusk that the muzzle flash seemed to be pretty much contained to around the muzzle brake. It didn't shoot out very far like some muzzle brakes that I've tested in the past. Now, if that's a problem to you, you can always just swap that out for like a 3-prong flash hider, and those also do a phenomenal job of compensating as well as reducing flash. But it does a pretty decent job of reducing flash considering that it's a muzzle brake. The other interesting thing about the muzzle brake is on the bottom side of it, it's actually already pre-drilled. So if you ever wanted to pin and weld it onto like a 13.9 inch barrel or a 14.5 inch barrel, just depending on what the length of that brake is, all you had to do is have the barrel drilled, drop your pin in there and throw some silver solder on it, and now you got a pin and welded barrel. So that's actually something you don't always see on higher end muzzle brakes. So as an example, like with the Landtac Dragon, I love that muzzle brake. It is phenomenal, but there's no pre-drilled holes if I need to pin and weld it. It's little things like that that I think just they really make a big difference. Moving on to the gas block on here, we have I think this is a mid-length gas system that's on here. On the bottom, it actually has 2 set screws, and I removed these set screws, and they were already torqued to the proper 25 inch-pounds before I removed them, and I retorqued them again using the Fix-It Sticks torque wrench. I love that thing to death. I'll make sure to have a link to that over at the build list just in case you guys are interested. Moving on back to the gun, going back towards the receiver set, you'll also notice this. There is 0 wobble between the upper and the lower. Now, this is a forged receiver set, so sometimes it's really hard to get a good match between the upper and the lower so you don't get that wobble. Now, some companies counteract this by putting some kind of a wedge in here or some kind of set screw so that they can really, get the wobble gone, but this one has none of those, and it is incredibly tight, but not so tight that you can't pop the takedown pins out. They do need a little breaking in, but it's really tight, and that indicates that it's a little bit higher quality. On the magazine release button, it's a little bit extended, and it is a little bit more ergonomic than a mil-spec button. Aside from that though, the mag release is pretty much mil-spec. Now, the safety on here is nothing to write home about. It is your standard mil-spec 90-degree safety. However, they are using an enhanced mil-spec trigger. And this trigger is actually made by Hyperfire Triggers. Now this trigger isn't anything crazy, but it is about, I'd say 50% better than a standard mil-spec trigger. I noticed that there's a little bit less creep. It has a better reset that forces my finger out a little bit better, and it just seems to be a cleaner trigger break just in general. Now the mil-spec trigger on here pulls at about 4.5 pounds with my Wheeler trigger pull gauge, whereas my other mil-spec triggers pull about 5.5, or even more. So the work that Hyperfire did on this trigger did make a difference. Now the reason that's important is typically I don't like these 90-degree safeties. I typically like something like a Radian that's 45 degrees. But I noticed with this gun that I could come up from here and I can depress the safety, pull the trigger simultaneously. Let me show you again. Usually on an AR-15, if I have a mil-spec trigger and a mil-spec safety selector, especially 90 degrees, I'm not that good and quick with it, but for some reason, this one tends to be set up a little bit better. I don't know exactly why I'm able to do that, but I am. Moving back to the grip, you do get a rubber overmolded grip, which I tend to like a lot more. It is their own proprietary one. It almost looks like the standard A2 grips, but it doesn't have the finger groove right up here. And because it's made of rubber, you just get a really good grip on it. Moving back to here, you do get an extended latch charging handle. It's not ambidextrous, but it does feel really good. And I actually really love how far it sticks out, because if I'm right up here, I can just grab it super easily and go back to town without really taking my eyes off of the target. It's a little bit better. Now, I will say one place they could have improved on it is they could have used a little bit larger of a roll pin. As I talked about in the video about upgrading your AR-15s, one of the biggest failure points to any charging handle is that tiny little roll pin. So I do wish that they would have used something a little bit more robust, but thankfully they at least included an extended latch charging handle. Moving back to the castle nut, one little area of concern, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but the castle nut's not staked. I would prefer them to stake that from the factory, just so I don't have to, but you can easily stake them. I'll have a video about that in the future, but it's really easy to stake them. You just need like a good punch and a hammer, and you essentially just hammer down right there so you can move some material into the notches on the castle nut. Now, one good thing that it does have back here on the end plate is it has a QD point. That's nothing special, but when you're talking about sub $1,000 guns, you don't usually see things like that. You might here and there, but on average, you're not gonna see a castle nut with a QD point. Moving back to the buttstock, I will tell you this buttstock had a problem that I didn't like, and I have since fixed it. It was really wobbly. Now, usually when I have a really wobbly buttstock, I usually get a buttstock that's just a little bit higher quality to put on there. But I actually really like this buttstock, which I'll tell you why in a second. So I just took a little bit of electrical tape, put it a little bit here on this side, and a little bit on this side, and I got rid of all the wobble. It only took a couple strips on each side. Now it's super tight. Now, I really like this buttstock because it has a very easy to grab handle right here for adjusting it. It also has two QD points back here. And then I like the fact that you have two spots where you can feed a sling through it if you don't want to use the QD point. So it has a lot of little features, and it has a couple of cons about it, but overall it's pretty awesome. As I mentioned earlier, we have a 16-inch barrel. This one happens to be chambered in .223 Wild, which means you can shoot both .223 and .556 through it, just like you can on .556 NATO, but it's just a little bit different. This one is a 1-in-8 twist rate, and this one is 4150 chromoly vanadium, and it is nitrited all the way through. Now, if you need to know more about how to choose barrels, I have a complete video on how to choose the best barrel for your purposes. I will link that down in the description below. I published it about a month ago and that video has gotten tons of views. It's not just a beginner's course. I go into a lot, in regards to the metallurgy and the way that guns are tested and manufactured for these barrels. So if you want to know more about that, link in the description for that video. But this barrel is basically a middle of the road barrel. It's nothing fancy and it's nothing that's bad. It's mil-spec and it's gonna work fine. Now on the bolt carrier group, it's kind of the same thing. It's a basic mil-spec bolt carrier group. It's got the Carpenter 158 tool steel that's used in the bolt, and it has the properly staked gas keys on there. You don't want those backing out. I've had that happen before before I started YouTube, and it causes cycling problems. But the one thing that the bolt has that a lot of cheaper bolt carrier groups don't have is it is nitrided instead of phosphate coated. So it's a little bit more slippery than your standard phosphate coating, but it's not quite as slippery as nickel boron bolt carrier groups. as an example. It's middle of the road, a little bit better than something cheap. Now, both the barrel as well as the bolt carrier group have been magnetic particle inspected. That means they went through with magnetic particles and tested it for any microscopic cracks or fractures in the metal, and they both passed. Now, they're not high pressure tested. And in that video where I talk about high pressure testing, that's a debated topic on whether that's necessary or not. I'll let you make the judgment for yourself if that's any good for you or not, but it's a debated topic. Some people say it's worth it, some people say it's not. We've covered this from front to back. I only found 2 cons with it. The first con being that the castle nut's not staked, and then the second con being that the butt stock was a little bit wobbly, so I had to fix it with a little bit of electrical tape. But just because this looks good on paper, let's talk about how it actually shoots at the range. Now, a couple of caveats for the range footage. I have not upgraded anything on this gun. The only thing I've added to this is a red dot that was from Strike Industries, and I have been testing this. I'm not gonna give you a review on it today. I put on some Magpul M-Bus sights, and I put on the Strike Industries forward grip just because I had it laying around. But I always like to get something like this, or maybe the BCM Gunfighter foregrip as well. I just like to be able to reach out and get my hand really on there to pull it into my shoulder. Another caveat is I didn't test this beyond 100 yards. This is what I would classify as a do-all-purpose rifle. Yeah, they could reach out 200 or 300 yards, if not a little bit more. However, I don't really have the space to do that for the testing of this gun. Right now, I'm about 390-ish rounds through this gun. This isn't gonna be a complete review because I don't think that's enough rounds to really justify a review. This is gonna be more of a first impressions. The way I've kind of done this in the past is if something starts malfunctioning or breaking, I will make another video about it so that you guys will know about that. Now, I shot a few different types of ammunition through here, mostly 55 grain 223. I shot some PMC brass. I shot some unnamed brass. I haven't shot any steel case through it, but it was all brass. I've shot some lower end stuff, some PMC, and some Federal American Eagle. I didn't really test for sub MOA accuracy because it's a do-all rifle, but it was as accurate as I could be. I got it zeroed up pretty quickly, gave it a 50-yard zero. My buddy Steve had a steel target set up at 100 yards, and I was able to hit it like first try. Okay. I think I was using a different scope. I had a 1:8 scope on here when I first zeroed it up. And I was able to hit at 100 yards, still silhouette in the standing position, multiple times. I think I missed it maybe once out of 5 shots. So it was just as accurate as I could be. Now, a couple of things that stuck out to me about this gun is it's very well balanced. I find when I'm at the range, it's really easy to come up from low ready or coming from high ready and really getting some shots off. I found that it's a very easy gun to shoot fast despite having this mil-spec trigger, but this muzzle brake really helps it shoot really flat and really fast. I was very surprised by that. In case you're not aware, I'm dedicating 2022 to rifles. I mean, we're gonna do handgun stuff this year too, but I'm really gonna focus hard on rifles, meaning AR-15s, and we are gonna start getting into bolt guns, which is very new to me, and I think it's gonna be a fun series for you guys to learn as I learn. But, I have a couple of other AR-15s here that are very comparable in price to the Grunt. This one is the F1 Firearms FDR-15. I don't have as many rounds through it as I do on the Grunt, but I feel like the Grunt is a better shooting gun, and the Grunt has better upgrades on it than the F1 Firearms FDR-15, but we will have a full video coming on this in the future. Just wanted to kind of give you some stuff off the cuff because I don't have my testing complete with the FDR-15 yet, but as of now, I kind of like the Grunt a little bit better, but that could change depending on how the Grunt performs in the future. And then we have the Palmetto State Armory, which is their custom line of rifles, which there really wasn't a whole lot that was custom about it besides the Cerakote job and I believe the safety that was on it. But it was a slightly upgraded Palmetto State Armory, and this is the gun that we use when I talked about upgrading your cheaper AR-15s. Now, this gun shoots phenomenally well even before I upgraded it. I was actually quite surprised on how well it shot, especially for the price. But these are about the same price, and I would say between the Palmetto State Armory and the Lead Star Arms, the Lead Star Arms is a couple of notches ahead of the PSA Custom. Now, with that said, there is a different PSA Custom that you can get that's like $400 more. It has a billet aluminum CNC receiver set. I have not tested that one yet, so I don't think that billet would affect the way that it shoots, but I could be wrong. So if we compare the Lead Star Arms Grunt to my current favorite AR-15, which is the Recce 14 from Bravo Company. This is a 14.5-inch pin and welded barrel, and this one also has quite a few upgrades on it. It did have a mil-spec trigger in it, and it had a mil-spec safety on it when I bought it, but I have upgraded the trigger and the safety because the mil-spec trigger in it wasn't as good as the mil-spec trigger that comes in this one. As of right now, I mean, I got more AR-15s coming to test this year, but currently this is my favorite of all time. It seems to blend the best of everything that I look for in an AR-15. I like the 14.5-inch pin and welded barrels better than I do 16-inch, especially for a dual-purpose rifle that's not meant to really go long range. To me, I like how this one is less front heavy. I'm sure if I did a 14.5 pin and welded on this one, it would feel about the same. Now, I'm not gonna tell you that this Grunt is as good as this. Like, there's very few gun companies in the game right now that do the quality control that BCM does. There are a few, but they're not gonna be, you know, sub $1,000 guns. But I will say the way that this guy feels, the way that it shoots, I've had zero malfunctions. I've tested multiple different types of mags in it. I've done the P mags, I've done the Lancer mags, I've done the Hera Arms mags and the ETS mags. None of them had any malfunctions and everything ran reliably as you should expect. And with that, I'm extremely happy with the way that this turned out. Now the question kind of becomes, all right, for those of you that might not be aware, I don't have to typically pay for things with money, I pay for them with time. Like these videos can take, you know, 40 to 50 hours to film, edit, and have published, and that's not counting the time that it takes to drive an hour to the range and the cost of ammo. That's how I pay for things. And honestly, the value of my video is worth a lot more than the price of these guns. The reason I say that is I don't consider people sending me a gun as payment or like I'm gonna be biased. Honestly, I don't care. If I piss off a company and they don't like the review I give and they say, hey, we're never sending you anything again, that's fine. If I ever need anything, I can afford to buy it. I wanna make that very clear to you guys. I don't give a two diddly rat's fart what people think if I give them a negative review. However, with that said, I like to be as fair as possible. So that brings me to the next question. If it were my own money and I was in the market for a mid-level AR-15, would I buy this or not? Now, despite that the castle nut wasn't staked, that's a super easy thing to do. Despite that this was wobbly, that's a super easy thing to fix. Everything else about this gun has been good. Currently, these guns can be had from anywhere from $950 up to about $1,050, kind of depending on where you get them and you know what kind of promos are running on them, but about $1,000 average price. And considering the fact that we have all those little upgrades that we mentioned before, dimpled barrel, pre-drilled hole in the muzzle brake, Carpenter 158 steel, we got a decent little buttstock, an enhanced mil-spec trigger, and we got the Cerakote job on it. You know, Cerakote's $250 or so to get done if you send your gun in after the fact. I would 100% buy this gun knowing what I know now. Now, with that said, what would I change about this gun knowing what I know now? Well, obviously I'm not gonna be running this with night vision, so I'm not worried about having the top Picatinny rail. But if I was interested in running a night vision optic, I would wanna get a different rail so that I can attach my IR laser to it. But that's not my purposes, so if that's your purposes, this isn't the gun for you. Typically, I like to throw those 90-degree safeties on here, and I might, but I don't feel the need to because of the way they have it set up where I can defeat the safety and pull the trigger simultaneously. So that's a good thing. I don't feel rushed to upgrade the trigger. Usually I always upgrade the trigger, but this one performs quite nicely. So I think it's totally worth the money. And I think that if you're the kind of guy, like I mentioned earlier, where you're like, I don't have time to research parts and I don't have time to put a gun together. I just want something that I can buy, slap an optic on, get it zeroed, and I can go out and defend myself with it, or I can go out to the range and have a good time with it. I think that this would be a viable option. I don't think it's the only option out there, but we'll cover that in future videos. What are your thoughts on this Leadstar Arms Grunt? I've heard a lot of positive things from other reviewers, and I've had a really hard time finding negative cons about it. But the problem is I have a sample size of 1. So keep in mind, just because I said I had a good experience with it, that doesn't mean that everyone will. So I encourage you to go watch other people's videos, go check out the forums and see what other people are saying about this gun, just in case there's something that I missed. But going back to what I said earlier, if you want to join the 1 million subscriber contest, where I'm going to be giving away stuff similar to this, wink wink, I will put a link to that video right here so you can get all the information you need on how to join the giveaway and how you can help us get to 1 million subscribers so we can defeat censorship. But until next time, guys, I love you, and you guys stay sexy.